Gene Hackman wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was a cinematic powerhouse. With iconic performances in The French Connection and Unforgiven, he shaped an era of filmmaking. Yet after 4 decades at the pinnacle of success, he disappeared without a grand send-off, without a farewell tour, without fanfare, just silence. But behind that silence lies a story of mystery, secrecy, and a life deliberately kept out of the public eye. In this video, we dive deep into the shocking truth behind Gene Hackman's mysterious death, the hidden financial troubles he left behind, and why Hollywood, and even his own family, seemed to wipe away his legacy. Was it merely the passage of time, or is there a darker secret lurking beneath the surface? If this intrigues you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, leave a 0. And don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more jaw-dropping revelations. Gene Hackman's daughter now utters cryptic words, as if peeling back the fragile layers of a legend who once ruled Hollywood. No dramatic grief, no heartfelt tribute. Leslie Hackman's unsettling, detached response sent ripples through an already fractured family, igniting speculation and turning relentless reporters into hunters circling a long-buried truth. Hackman was discovered lifeless in a cold, desolate home, the air thick with toxic fumes. But the real shock wasn't his death. It was the eerie silence that lasted 2 decades, shattered the moment Leslie finally broke it. The daughter who once stayed in the shadows has now become the key witness. But instead of mourning, every word she speaks cuts like a blade, unraveling a grim truth no one dared to confront. Leslie Hackman isn't preserving Gene Hackman's legacy. She's dismantling it, reducing it to a mere ghost of its former glory. Behind her icy stare and cryptic remarks, she holds a chilling secret, one that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about her father. Gene Hackman, once the undisputed king of Hollywood, commanded the silver screen with legendary performances in The French Connection, Unforgiven, Bonnie and Clyde, and Superman. His face adorned the covers of elite magazines. He strode down red carpets beneath blinding lights, and he basked in the thunderous applause of millions. But after 2004, he disappeared. No farewell tour, no grand retirement speech, not even a final bow. He never returned for award ceremonies, never faced the press again. It was as if a Hollywood giant had simply vanished, his name reduced to fleeting anniversary retrospectives and nostalgic tributes to an era long gone. He retreated even further, allowing time to dim his own legend beneath Hollywood's dazzling spotlight. Seeking solitude, Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, 31 years his junior, escaped to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Their $3.8 million sanctuary, nestled deep in the mountains, became their world. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just the 2 of them, 3 devoted dogs, and the quiet rhythm of days slipping by, far removed from the relentless chaos of fame. Neighbors in Santa Fe seldom saw Hackman venture out in the mornings. Instead, he sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand, gazing silently at the distant mountains. The once commanding figure in a sheriff's uniform had withered into a fragile old man, his deep-set eyes heavy with unspoken secrets. His life felt like an old film caught in slow motion. Each memory, each forgotten scene flickering behind closed eyes, replaying in an endless loop of the past. Betsy Arakawa, once met with skepticism by Hackman's family, ultimately became the one who stood by him the longest. She cared for him with the precision of a seasoned nurse, ensuring every pill, every meal was meticulously in place. But was her devotion a reflection of unconditional love? Or was Betsy, like their secluded Santa Fe retreat, a sanctuary on the surface, yet a silent prison where Hackman's loneliness deepened, unseen and inescapable? Close friends who visited Hackman couldn't ignore the profound change in him after he stepped away from Hollywood. He spoke little, steered clear of conversations about his career, and never revisited his own films. Any script that managed to reach him was swiftly discarded, often by Betsy before he even laid eyes on it. In a rare interview, Hackman confessed, "I haven't watched my films in years. They're part of the past. They don't belong to me anymore." For 2 decades, from 2004 to 2024, Hackman lived like a ghost, his presence fading, his name spoken only in nostalgia. No grand events, no red carpets, no interviews. The world caught a rare glimpse of him in 2023 when paparazzi snapped a photo of Hackman and Betsy at a modest seafood restaurant. He looked frail, his frame thinner, his steps unsteady as he clung to his wife's arm. Yet even in that fleeting moment, the same piercing intensity that once defined the French Connection still burned beneath the weight of time. Neighbors remember Hackman's house as a place of near-constant silence, its doors rarely opening to the outside world. But on certain late nights, muffled arguments would seep through the walls, never loud enough to make out the words, yet always ending the same way, with Betsy having the final say. An eerie presence clung to the home, an unspoken tension that unsettled those nearby, as if the very walls were burdened with secrets too heavy to ever be revealed. For 21 years, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa disappeared from the public eye. Their absence became a velvet curtain, closing off the final act of a legendary career while fueling endless speculation. Some believed Hackman sank into depression after stepping away from the spotlight, while others murmured that Betsy kept him secluded, quietly controlling his fortune from behind closed doors. Whatever the truth, Hackman seemed to welcome the silence, as if he were methodically erasing his own name from Hollywood's history. In Hollywood, disappearing didn't mean being forgotten, but for Hackman, it was intentional. He turned down interviews, ignored invitations, and even declined a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. To many, it was incomprehensible. Why would a man who had dedicated his life to his craft walk away so completely? His silence wasn't just withdrawal, it felt like a warning. No one spends 40 years in the spotlight only to vanish without a trace. So what was he hiding? A long-buried family secret, a shocking will, or a pain so profound that not even his first wife, Faye Maltz, nor his 3 children ever truly knew the depth of it? When the late-night call came from Santa Fe police, reporting 2 lifeless bodies found in separate rooms and a mysteriously deceased dog, the quiet suspicions that had lingered for 21 years erupted into a firestorm. Gene Hackman, once an unstoppable force in Hollywood, was now just a name on a coroner's report. The silence that had cloaked his final years was not the end of his story. It was merely the beginning of something far more sinister. As the tragedy unraveled, his daughter, Leslie Ann Hackman, stood frozen, clutching his will, tears slipping down her face as she realized the weight of what had been left behind. The winding dirt roads leading to Gene Hackman's secluded estate on the outskirts of Santa Fe carried an eerie, almost forgotten stillness. Unlike California's golden glow or the crisp air of the East Coast, the high desert sun cast a weary, faded light, less a source of warmth and more a silent witness, waiting for something to collapse. Perched atop a lonely hill, Gene Hackman's million-dollar estate stood in eerie silence, guarding secrets no one dared to disturb. Neighbors rarely glimpsed the couple. No leisurely strolls, no weekend gatherings, no appearances at the local church or bustling farmers' markets. When Gene and Betsy did emerge, they were nothing more than fleeting shadows, slipping past watchful eyes before disappearing behind the towering iron gate. They say that at dawn, when the sun barely crept over the mountains, Betsy would slip outside with the aging dog. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the quiet surroundings as if dreading unseen eyes upon her. The dog's slow, heavy steps seemed to mirror the weight of something unspoken, lingering in the air. Less than 15 minutes later, she would return, carefully latching the gate behind her, her touch light, almost reverent, as if she feared disturbing the restless ghosts within Gene Hackman's home. As Gene Hackman's heart grew weaker, his world shrank to the walls of his secluded home. The only outsider who ever crossed the threshold was a middle-aged delivery woman, her face lined with quiet sorrow. She never lingered, speaking only in hushed tones before slipping away. Once, in a rare moment of unease, she confided to a neighbor, "They're hiding something big that no one knows." Betsy Arakawa, ever the enigma, kept the world at arm's length. Beyond Gene, she had no close connections, only the heavy silence that clung to their home like an unshakable shadow. But a neighbor just beyond Hackman's fence began to notice something strange. Betsy often made hushed phone calls in the backyard. Her voice was too low to fully decipher, but now and then, fragments slipped through the trees. "He's getting worse. No, we can't let anyone know. This house isn't safe." The calls always ended the same way, with a long, weary sigh, as if she bore an unbearable weight. Who was on the other end? A family member? Or someone who held the Hackman family's deepest secrets? No one knew. But as the calls grew more frequent, so did the worry etched across Betsy's face, deepening like a shadow she could no longer escape. Gene Hackman's home, once celebrated by the media as an architectural masterpiece hidden in the wilderness, carried an unshakable chill for those who stepped inside. It wasn't the desert air or the design. It was something far deeper, an unspoken sorrow that lingered in every shadowed corner. The walls were adorned with countless framed photographs, yet not a single one featured Hackman's 3 biological children. Instead, only carefully curated images of him and Betsy remained, a visual narrative of their travels, as if the past had been meticulously erased. Hackman's children, once laughing and playing in the backyard of his Los Angeles home, had long vanished from his life. He never spoke publicly about his health, but whispers among neighbors painted a grim picture: heart disease, arthritis, spinal degeneration. Yet his most agonizing affliction wasn't physical. It was the slow, creeping curse that haunts Hollywood's aging legends. From Marlon Brando to Katharine Hepburn and Greta Garbo, the greatest icons of the Golden Age suffered the same cruel fate, fading into obscurity while still alive. For Hackman, a former box office titan whose name once guaranteed success, watching himself become a mere footnote in film history may have been the most devastating illness of all. In a rare conversation with a neighbor, Betsy once admitted, "Gene doesn't watch his old films. He says they belong to another life." With those words, Hackman severed his final connection to Hollywood, discarding his past like a forgotten script. But every night, as the house settled into silence, Betsy would catch glimpses of him standing by the bedroom window, gazing at the distant mountains, murmuring to himself. Those whispers weren't the wind or fading echoes of an aging mind. They were fragments of unfinished conversations between Gene Hackman and the man he used to be, the one who once stood beneath the blinding lights, believing his reign would never end. But when the doors closed and the Hollywood glow faded, all that remained was an aging man, lost in his million-dollar home. And beyond the iron gates, the world moved on, unaware that Gene Hackman still lingered, his whispers the only remnants of a legend waiting to be remembered. The once secluded million-dollar estate in the New Mexico hills, a fortress of whispered secrets and hushed midnight calls, now stands as a haunting crime scene. Red and blue police lights pulse against the adobe walls, casting restless shadows that stretch into the night. Neighbors huddle behind wooden fences, their murmurs carried by the desert wind, trying to unravel the mystery unfolding inside a house that had remained silent for so long. The police weren't summoned by frantic calls or piercing screams, only an eerie, unnatural stillness had drawn them. It was the local drug dealer, a weary-faced woman from down the road, who first noticed it. That unshakable stench, not just the smell of decay, not just chemicals, something far worse, a scent that clung to the air, heavy and insidious, warning that whatever lay inside had been waiting to be found. When the door swung open, investigators weren't met with the chaos of a violent crime scene, but something far more unnerving: absolute silence. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa lay in separate rooms, their bodies positioned differently, yet bound by the same eerie fate. Hackman rested on his back atop the bed, the blanket neatly pulled to his chest, as if he had simply succumbed to exhaustion after a long, weary day. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly parted. Not a single bruise, no signs of struggle, no trace of pain. Just the unsettling stillness of a man who had quietly slipped away, leaving only silence in his wake. Just a few steps away, Betsy Arakawa lay slumped beside the bed, her lifeless body frozen in an eerie final moment. One hand still clutched the landline phone, one of the last remnants of their early years in the house. Yet the screen showed no record of an outgoing or incoming call. Had she tried to reach someone? Had she realized, too late, that something was terribly wrong? Her vacant eyes remained fixed on the window, where the last threads of evening light clung to the horizon, as if in her final moments she had been staring at something something just beyond the glass, something that had arrived with the night. When the police arrived, Jean and Betsy's 3 dogs were still in the house. 2 were alive, trembling beside their owners' lifeless bodies, their red-rimmed eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. But the oldest dog, the one Betsy had walked every morning, was dead in the hallway between the 2 bedrooms. No signs of struggle, no blood, no wounds. It looked as though it had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. But why did 2 survive while 1 did not? Was the gas not strong enough to kill them all? Or had something happened before the fumes filled the house? A tragic coincidence or a deliberate choice? The forensic team quickly inspected the heating system, gas lines, and appliances, searching for the source of the deadly fumes. What they discovered sent a chill through the investigation. There were no carbon monoxide leaks, no malfunctioning gas stoves, no electrical faults. The toxic gas that had filled the house hadn't come from any natural failure. Then came the most unsettling revelation: traces of hydrogen sulfide, a lethal gas with the stench of rotten eggs, nearly undetectable in low concentrations. But where had it come from? It wasn't seeping from the plumbing or drifting up from the drains. Instead, the evidence pointed to something far more sinister. It had been introduced, either from outside the house or, even more disturbingly, from within. Gene Hackman died without a single mark on his body. No struggle, no sign of distress. Betsy Arakawa met the same fate, except she died clutching the phone, as if desperately trying to reach someone. Could their deaths have been carefully staged to resemble an accident? A simple gas leak? But if so, why was there evidence of a gas that didn't belong in the house? Questions piled up like the unseen walls that had long concealed the secrets of their home. Who was the first to notice the deadly fumes? Did Gene slip away first, or did Betsy witness his final moments before succumbing herself? And in those last, desperate seconds, who was she trying to call? If this was murder, it wasn't impulsive. It was cold, calculated, and carried out by someone with the patience to end an aging couple's life in the most chilling way possible. The cruel irony was that Gene Hackman's children, though distant from their father, had always braced themselves for the inevitable. At 94, his passing was only a matter of time. But no one expected it to happen like this. No one thought it would take Betsy too, the woman over 30 years his junior, the one who should have been arranging his funeral, not sharing his fate. Had they still been living as a couple, or had they quietly grown apart in that vast, lonely house? What were their last words to each other? Were Betsy's hushed phone calls tied to the silent killer in their home? Or had she unknowingly become a pawn in something much darker? As investigators draped white sheets over their bodies, the million-dollar estate fell into silence once more. But this time, the secrets inside were no longer hidden. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's funeral was as quiet as the final years of their lives. No flashing cameras, no intrusive headlines, just a small gathering of family. But beneath the solemn silence, tension simmered. Suspicious glances flickered between those closest to them, unspoken questions hanging in the air. The shock of losing both Gene and Betsy at once was already unsettling, but what came next sent ripples through the room. When Hackman's personal lawyer stepped forward, the air grew heavy. His will had been updated just months before their deaths. And this wasn't just a simple redistribution of wealth, it unveiled a tangled web of unexpected financial moves, cryptic investments, and unsettling transactions. Most damning of all, it exposed long-buried family conflicts, simmering just beneath the surface, now threatening to explode. The lawyer carefully unsealed the envelope, his voice steady but betraying the weight of what he was about to reveal. Gene Hackman's estate, valued at an estimated $80 million, included stocks, real estate, liquid assets, and a network of anonymous investment accounts. But the distribution was a shock, a cold, calculated division that left the room in uneasy silence. Nearly 40% of the fortune went to Betsy Arakawa, the wife more than 30 years his junior. Another 20% was split equally among Hackman's 3 biological children, a sum far less than they had expected. A modest 10% was left to an arts education charity, a move that raised no eyebrows. But it was the remaining 30% that sent a chill through those present. It had been funneled into a mysterious trust, locked away for a decade, with its primary beneficiary remaining undisclosed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Why the secrecy? Who was meant to inherit such a significant portion of Gene Hackman's legacy? And most importantly, what was he trying to hide? Who was the hidden beneficiary? Why had Gene structured his fortune this way? The lawyer clarified a crucial legal twist. Since Gene and Betsy had died almost simultaneously, the exact order of their deaths couldn't be determined. Under New Mexico inheritance law, when no clear order of death is established, assets are treated as if both individuals passed at the same time. This meant Betsy's inheritance wouldn't go to her own family, it would revert back to Gene's estate. Suddenly, the equation shifted. Gene's 3 biological children, who had been left with just 20%, now stood to receive a much larger share. Yet it wasn't that simple. Betsy, the woman they had never fully accepted as family, had become an invisible yet powerful presence in their father's will. At the funeral, they remained silent, their expressions unreadable. But behind closed doors at the lawyer's office, the decades of unresolved tension, unspoken resentments, and buried betrayals erupted like a long-dormant volcano, turning Gene Hackman's final legacy into a battleground. Leslie Hackman, Gene's eldest daughter, was the first to break the tense silence. Her voice trembled, though whether from grief or anger was unclear. "Betsy was never our mother. Don't expect us to pretend now," she said bitterly. David, Gene's second son, let out a dry laugh. 40% of the estate to a woman who never gave him children, while his own blood barely gets a quarter? That's rich. The weight of years, awkward family dinners, forced pleasantries, and Betsy's futile attempts to connect with them came rushing back. To Leslie and David, Betsy had always been the woman who walked into their father's life when he was already a legend, already wealthy. To them, she was simply lucky. But for Gene, Betsy had been the only constant when Hollywood's bright lights faded, when the world stopped caring. Had he truly trusted her? Or had he buried quiet suspicions beneath the cold, calculated clauses of his will? The answers, it seemed, were locked away with the secret beneficiary, waiting to be unearthed. As investigators combed through Gene Hackman's assets, they uncovered something unexpected: anonymous investment accounts tied to industries far removed from Hollywood. Despite never publicly expressing interest in cryptocurrency, Hackman held significant shares in companies specializing in artificial intelligence and biological data. But the real shock came from a recent financial move. Just weeks before his death, Hackman quietly transferred nearly $2 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Why would a retired actor nearing the end of his life suddenly shift such a large sum? Was it a routine investment, or was he trying to hide something he knew time wouldn't allow him to explain? Leslie sat in the car, staring blankly ahead as silent tears traced down her face. The grief wasn't just for her father's death. It was for the truth that had unraveled before her. The man she once idolized, the father who watched movies with her as a child, was now a stranger draped in secrets. Behind the warmth of his presence lay cold calculations, hidden assets, cryptic investments, and financial dealings that felt more like a puzzle than a legacy. "Maybe we never really knew him," Leslie whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. The multi-million-dollar inheritance, instead of being a final thread tying the family together, had become a blade, severing what little remained. A fortune left behind, but at a price no amount of money could mend. Gene Hackman was never the conventional Hollywood heartthrob. He lacked the chiseled charm of a leading man, the effortless allure of his era's romantic idols. But what he had was something far rarer: raw, undeniable power. Hackman wasn't just an actor, he was a force, devouring every frame with performances that left an imprint on cinema itself. In the 1980s, standing among Hollywood's elite in the Glorious Seven, he was a king without a throne. From The French Connection to Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Hackman didn't simply play roles, he embodied them. He was the rugged, unshaken core of the American identity, the weight of a fading dream etched into every line on his face. In him, audiences saw the grit of a bygone era, the decay of the American dream, the quiet agony of those the world left behind. And then, just like them, he too faded into the shadows. In 2004, Gene Hackman walked away from Hollywood, not with a grand farewell, not with a final masterpiece to cement his legacy, but with quiet resignation. He cited health reasons, but everyone knew that was just the surface of a deeper truth. Hollywood no longer had a place for him. The industry he helped shape had transformed into a blockbuster assembly line, where young faces, superhero franchises, and CGI spectacles replaced the grit and soul of serious filmmaking. The era of weathered powerhouse actors, the kind who carried entire films on raw talent alone, had faded. Producers who once fought for Hackman's time no longer called. Directors who once revered him now chased the next marketable face. Gene Hackman didn't retire. Hollywood had retired, and in its place, a new machine emerged, one that had no room for legends. After leaving Hollywood, Gene Hackman and Betsy retreated to New Mexico, a place with no red carpets, no star-studded galas, no echoes of the life he once knew. People questioned why a legend of his stature would choose such an isolated existence. The answer was simple and devastating. In Hollywood, no one needed him anymore. In New Mexico, no one knew who he was. What should have been a peaceful retirement in a $1 million desert villa slowly became a gilded cage. Hackman and Betsy lived in near total seclusion, their ties to the world unraveling year by year. Interview requests dwindled before vanishing entirely. There were no Lifetime Achievement Awards, no grand tributes, no final recognition of a man who had once defined an era of cinema. Hollywood and the media had moved on, as if erasing his name from the history books, leaving Hackman not just forgotten, but invisible. Gene Hackman spent his final years as a ghost king, once a ruler of Hollywood, now cast aside by the very industry he helped define. The most bitter truth was that his greatest, most profound role would never be filmed. There was no script, no director, no dazzling lights, just four walls, a few aging dogs, and a wife who watched the daily, bearing witness to the slow decline of the man she once adored. Hackman never feared death. He once admitted, "If I die alone one day, I won't be surprised." That's the fate of those who live too long in the limelight. But his exit was more than just the inevitable end of a long life. It was a sentence, a quiet, merciless verdict handed down by an industry that had no patience for aging, no room for those unwilling to bow to its ever-changing demands. Hackman didn't just fade away, he was exiled, punished for daring to live on his own terms. Gene Hackman didn't die from old age or illness. He died because Hollywood had abandoned him long before his heart ever stopped beating. The industry that once celebrated him only did so when he was profitable, when his name filled theater seats and his performances brought in Oscars. But that love was as fleeting as a Monday matinee ticket, cheap, temporary, and easily discarded. When Hackman was no longer a box office draw, no longer the man delivering unforgettable performances or headline-worthy interviews, Hollywood's love vanished. It was never real love to begin with. It was transactional, conditional, an admiration that existed only when he served a purpose. And when he became inconvenient, when he was no longer a name that could be marketed, Hollywood did what it always does. It erased him. Gene Hackman wasn't alone. He was just one of many Hollywood titans who once illuminated the silver screen, only to be cast aside when the industry no longer had use for them. Peter O'Toole, the legendary star of Lawrence of Arabia, slipped away quietly, his passing barely making ripples. Burt Reynolds, once a box office king and a sex symbol, spent his final years struggling with debt and fading relevance. Mickey Rourke, a rebel who once had it all, found himself clawing for roles in an industry that had long decided he was past his prime. Hollywood's love has never been eternal. It's a fleeting illusion, a contract with an expiration date. And when the lights dim, when the cameras stop rolling, all that remains is silence. Gene Hackman carried the weight of an entire generation, actors who poured their souls into their craft, who refused to fit the manufactured mold, and who aged with dignity instead of surrendering to Hollywood's obsession with youth. His death wasn't just a personal loss or a farewell for film lovers. It was a damning indictment of an industry that builds legends only to discard them once they no longer serve a purpose. Betsy, in her final words, captured the cruel irony of it all. Gene never forgot who he was. It was Hollywood that forgot. The verdict on Gene Hackman's career had been passed long before his final breath. His death was only the epilogue. Hollywood didn't erase him in an instant. It erased him slowly, piece by piece, through neglect and indifference, replacing its former king with newer, shinier faces. And in the end, all that remained was the silence of a legend the industry pretended never existed. Gene Hackman passed away on a somber afternoon, without headlines, without a grand farewell. The news of his death drifted through the media as quietly as the final years he spent in the vast, lonely desert of New Mexico, a place where his name had long faded from Hollywood's memory. There was no national tribute, no e-mourning crowds leaving flowers at his gate, no candlelit vigils, just a handful of brief news reports, a few dry career summaries, and then nothing. Once a cinematic titan, Hackman had become just another name lost in time. buried beneath legal documents, forgotten tax returns, and the cold calculations of his final will. But behind the paperwork, behind the silence, there were fragments, whispers of unfinished stories, secrets still waiting to be uncovered. Hackman's will didn't just divide his multi-million-dollar estate. It opened a Pandora's box of unanswered questions. A hidden portion of his wealth, entangled in offshore investments and foreign transactions, created a financial labyrinth so complex that even his own lawyer struggled to piece it together. Why would a man who once condemned tax loopholes quietly funnel assets through overseas accounts? In the years leading up to his death, why did he repeatedly revise his will, severing ties with certain relatives, adding unfamiliar names, and allocating unexplained sums to an anonymous NGO? Gene Hackman didn't just leave behind a fortune, he left behind a puzzle, and with each uncovered detail, the mystery only deepened. Gene Hackman's death was initially attributed to old age and complications from chronic heart disease. But whispers of something more sinister began circulating through local New Mexico newspapers, a chilling theory that toxic gas had seeped into his secluded home. A small but detectable amount of carbon monoxide was found within the estate. Investigators speculated that the home's aging ventilation system, though functional, may have slowly poisoned him over time, causing fatigue-induced hallucinations and accelerating his decline. What made this even more unsettling was the fact that the system had been inspected just months before Hackman's death. At the time, there were no leaks, no warning signs. Had this been a tragic accident, or had someone deliberately turned his multi-million-dollar retreat into a death trap? Could his shadowy financial dealings have played a role in his mysterious end? Local authorities launched an investigation, but as Hollywood moved on, so did the headlines. The case, much like the man himself, slipped into silence. Leslie stood before the cameras, tears streaming down her face, not just for the loss of her father, but for the cruel betrayal that came with it. She had believed that after years of distance, she and Hackman had finally found their way back to each other. But his final will told a different story, cold, calculated, and distant, as if their reconciliation had never truly existed. When a legend falls, it isn't just sorrow that follows, it's betrayal, fractured families, and wounds that never heal. If Hollywood were a house, Gene Hackman had laid its foundation brick by brick. Yet in his final moments, Hollywood never looked back. No grand memorial, no special retrospectives, not even a fleeting tribute at an award show. Worse still, in industry circles, younger actors whispered among themselves, "Who is Gene Hackman?" And just like that, the place that once worshipped him had moved on, shifting its gaze to new faces, marketable names, and the next fleeting sensation. Because in Hollywood, the line between immortality and irrelevance is razor thin, and Gene Hackman, once a king, had been left behind in the dust. Gene Hackman, once revered as Hollywood's unthroned king, died a forgotten man on the very soil where he had built his legacy. The industry that once praised him had long since moved on, and his death was nothing more than a fleeting headline buried beneath a flood of trivial celebrity gossip. The stories were never told, the tapes were never made. His family remained silent. The public barely noticed. And as time passed, Hackman's name faded, his secrets slipping into the grave with him, at least for now. Because in Hollywood, nothing stays buried forever. All it takes is someone with enough ambition or enough ruthlessness to dig them back up. One day, those hidden recordings may surface, and when they do, the world will see that Gene Hackman's death wasn't just a consequence of age or illness, but the weight of the dark secrets that followed him to the very end. But that day has yet to come. For now, the curtain has closed, and Gene Hackman, the forgotten king, lingers only as a ghost in Hollywood's shadow. He is gone, taking his decaying truths to the grave. What he left behind was not a legacy, but a curse, one that demands payment in whispers, suspicion, and wounds that time will never heal. Will the truth about Gene Hackman ever come to light, or will it remain one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss more thrilling content. See you in the next one.